Haven't done this in a while. Just another method to combat depression. Let's see what 100-year-old books have to say it. 4:37 a.m. in the morning on June 7th, 2019. This is the one. All right. What number? Where are we starting? Let's just do this quick. One of three. It's run-on pages. Where are we? Starting at 335. Here. So probably book 2. All right. And it goes up to 660. And it is book 2. I can't see the computer very well in terms of I can't read nothing with these glasses. These are prescription glasses that I had to wait 4 years for. And when I got them, couldn't really use them. But I use the magnifying part of it for like when I'm in the sewing room or something like that. And when I'm working with numbers, very small, and I have to flip because I'll write something down and then when I go to read something, I can't. I have to put on the dollar store glasses. So I'm constantly flipping the glasses. And then what happens is the following day, because my eyes are like going like this, there's a high probability that I'll have a headache. Because I don't use this stuff very often, I don't know. Is this recording? Can you even hear me? I don't know. What the fuck? What the fuck was that? Okay. Anyway, let's get on with it. Yeah, okay. Yeah, like just close your eyes and just pick a page. And there's the page right there. Oh, wow. That's the page. What is that, people? What is that? Huh? What are we looking at? The sun and his family. The great worlds that travel through space forever. The great worlds that spin round the sun in space travel faster than anything we can conceive, 1,000 times faster than an express train. We cannot show them moving, but our artist has presented them as motor cars to help us to imagine them in a ceaseless flight around the sun. Saturn, Uranus, Jupiter, Neptune, talks about the planets Venus, Mars, Mercury, Earth, and the moon. Notice how they don't have Pluto in there. Do you remember when Pluto was designated as a planet? I remember being taught that in school, people. Okay, you had to remember Pluto. That's why you remembered it, because you had to remember it. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, they decided that Pluto wasn't a planet anymore, and you had to forget it, that it just no longer existed. Right? Isn't that kind of what's going on with the internet these days? Because honestly, I'm listening to these people that have like big channels, like 300 million subscribers or 19,000 subscribers, a whole lot of subscribers than I ever have, right? I've only got like 426. So when you're dealing in 3 million, 10,000, and so on and so on, and you know, they're up on YouTube making commentary about how censorship is taking over and wiping out people's channels for ambiguous reasons. And I know how that works, because I have had videos removed from my channel for ambiguous reasons. However, if I was to re-upload those videos and you listen to those videos, you could clearly understand why somebody wouldn't like them and would want to censor them. It doesn't mean that it's not truthful. It just means that they don't want to get caught. That's what it means, people. They don't want people thinking about, well, if their behavior is this way, there must be a reason why. Like, I'll give you an example. One of my first videos that were hit. We'll get on to this in a minute, okay? Because actually this kind of relates to what we're talking about here, because I didn't see Pluto in there, all right? And this is an old book, people, so how is it that I was taught in, oh geez, I don't even remember when I was in school what year it was, but you know, when I was in like, I don't know, grade 8, grade 9, you know, and around that time, maybe grade 5, grade 4, I don't know. I just remember being taught that there was a planet called Pluto. And then after I grew up, it was like discovered that there was no thing called Pluto in terms of a planet. It was more like a moon, and it was non-existent, and they wiped it off the freaking history books. So I don't know how that got into my brain, but you know, this book is over 100 years old, and there is no mention of Pluto. I did not see Pluto. Let's see if we can find Pluto before we go too far into it. So anyway, on the internet, even with reading glasses, Jupiter, Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, there's some comet, Mars, Venus, Mercury, Earth, and the moon. Isn't that amazing? I bet you remembered being taught about Pluto being a planet. It's very small. So anyway, on the internet, people are being censored with their voices, right? In terms of their being demonetized. Some channels are being completely shut down. And when you're dealing with 1,000 subscribers and up, you know, people are creatures of habit, right? They work hard to, you know, build up their web pages or their fan base or whatever it is. You know, they give it their all. You know, it takes sacrifice to be able to put yourself up even in a public medium. And of course, you know, the more successful you become, the more pressure there is, the more responsibilities. And, you know, companies such as YouTube They capitalize off of that. And then over a period of years, all of a sudden, Pluto doesn't exist anymore, even though you were taught that it was at one point there. Well, that's kind of what's going on with the internet. People have been led to believe that they can do all this stuff and that they get established into it, getting comfortable with their lives because routine is a staple, right? And then all of a sudden the rug is being pulled out from underneath them. And it's not because they're, giving out misinformation or, they're some people for sure, they use fear porn as a means to draw attention to their channels. But, on the other hand, people are entitled to their opinions. So because what is one person's truth isn't necessarily the other person's truth. So, for me, with the video that was taken down first time around was connected to Andre. I can upload that video. There's like three videos, maybe 4 videos in all the years that I've been doing YouTube videos that have been taken down. And it's not because of what I said was untrue. It was because of what I said was very true. And it disturbed people to the point where if you were to hear what I was to say and really stop and think about it, chances are you would agree and become suspicious yourself, and you wouldn't be so apt to be sucker punched when the shit hits the fan in your family life, right? In regards to, you wake up one day and one of your grandkids are up in freaking foster care as you're being accused of being a bad nana, and your teenage daughters are being accused of criminals just so that the people who took your grandson could justify their position in life, right? And then to carry on and it be someone like me that does a video that talks about where they want me to go and meet my grandson after 6 months of not seeing him, with, scarecrows in a freaking centerpiece of a building with windows up on top. So shaded glass tinted windows where, the KKK with their freaking hoods on can stand there with their arms crossed, watching you in this little enclosed space with apples that are falling off the tree, with them rotting on the ground with the scarecrow. And mind you, this is in the middle of freaking July. Like, who has a scarecrow with families visiting vulnerable children with rotten apples around them? That was the video that they took down, and they didn't freaking like what I had to say about it. Because it was too close to the truth, people. That's why. Didn't make it wrong. It just was somebody else's truth in terms of the families that go to those centers that have to deal with those kind of environments, as the people that are getting paid to play games injure families with no repercussions. So anyway, this video is not about that, although I can empathize how these people are feeling in terms of, like, some of these people started their YouTube channels in 2000, because this all relates. Where's Pluto? That's why I pulled out these books. I wanted to see what the fucking future was about. These are like my little tarot cards. Right? I got a whole more yet. I'm only working with 3 books right now. And it just so happens Pluto has disappeared, just like a lot of people that have invested like 10, 13, 14 years of video time to establish, gainful employment, an alternative media source where the information is not necessarily biased in terms of what mainstream is, right? Like, the old days are gone. Mainstream media doesn't own the newspaper anymore. Although I do believe that we should have more newspapers in the community in terms of the actual print versus relying on Google to get all the information. Because if you get all the information just from Google, then for sure you're going to get censored. That's one reason why I like books, because you can go and you can cross-reference things. And not only that, when the lights go out and there is no internet and people are gooning, I can just simply say, here's a book, go read it. So anyway, okay, so do we go left or right? Which way do I go? It's almost like I'm not in the center of the book. You can clearly see I'm not in the center of the book. So how did we come up with Pluto missing from the history books, even though I remember being taught that Pluto was a planet? And then I also remember somebody at some point coming around saying, well, no, Pluto's really not a planet. You know, we need to take it out of our classrooms. But then on the other hand, go back 100 years and they weren't even talking about Pluto. So how does that work, people? I'd like to freaking know. But it still relates to what's going on today, because people have established, you know, their archives and all these things that they've done. And then, you know, like in a nutshell, this reminds me of, I don't want to say it, but YouTube is kind of starting to remind me of a GeoCities. Now, GeoCities came from China, okay, someplace like that. I mean, I think they had their extensions they had the franchise in California, but the original company itself came from China. So when GeoCities went down and shut down their free services and basically everything, right? It obviously started at head office within China, right? And then eventually the American one shut down. And then that's when I had to take everything that I had built up on GeoCities in terms of web pages and all this other stuff, and then create my own website with my own web server to be able to hold those files without them being just magically deleted one day because the company decided that it no longer wanted to cater to the public. You know, it obviously got what it wanted, and then when it got what it wanted, it didn't need the people anymore, and it got rid of the people. Well, YouTube seems to be kind of going down that path for whatever reason. And I'm like, oh, and I'm hearing all these people like losing their channels, and, you know, they're, what do you call it? You know, I don't monetize, so I'm not too worried about that. Not that I could, even if I could, people, I don't think I would monetize, right? Because it just, for me, it's not what I started out to do. So there's really no point in trying to finish it that way, right? But I do feel that with YouTube trying to cut back on the bandwidth, I think that's probably one of the bigger issues. And it's just nobody really talks about it because that bandwidth can get costly, right? And that's what advertisers help to pay for, is the bandwidth. So these bigger YouTube channels and, you know, those types of things, what they do is they, like this Tommy Soror or whatever, this black dude that sits up there and talks bad about black people, right? Nonstop. Anyway, he has more than one channel, like YouTube channel. He has like several of them, and then he interconnects them through his live streams. And so he's sucking up a lot of bandwidth, right? And, you know, people try and flag him down with the excuse of, well, you know, you're picking on black women or blah, 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 right? You know, so, but that's still, you know, people are not obligated to watch him, right? And so, and he also talks about how, you know, his stalkers make threats on his life and all this stuff, and YouTube does absolutely nothing about it, which I tend to agree. I have my little stalker group, and YouTube has done nothing to curb that problem in terms of being able to provide the creator, regardless of how they create their videos, with, you know, reliable IP addresses so that we can take those IP addresses to the police to prevent the ongoing gang stalking that occurs, right? But for these larger channels, it's beyond gang stalking now. It's the actual company itself that is targeting the creators of YouTube to cut back on expenses. And they're using ambiguity, right? You don't really know. You kind of know, but you don't know because they're not being clear about what they're doing and what they're saying or anything like that. you can't defend yourself against something you don't know, right? If you're being accused of something, but they're not being specific as to what they're accusing you of, but they already judge you, deem you guilty, and punish you, it's just kind of like what goes in part and parcel with my life, right? Now it's on the internet with these YouTube channels being shut down or being demonetized or being censored, being shut out after years of being educated that they're there, and they made those investments and they've learned how to interconnect their live streams and their web pages and blah blah blah, and they're rooted and they've got their routines, and they can budget their life around it, and that type of thing. And now all of a sudden it's all changing, just like Pluto disappeared. So do we go left or right? Which one do we do? I'm just watching. Are you snoozing? What a dusty book. I can smell it. We'll just go this way. Let's see what we get. Because we're pretty spot on with this. I'd say so. What was this? When was this book done? 1902 or something? Is that blank? That is blank. Right there. Let's see what that says. The shaping of the earth. The story of the earth. Okay, this is where I just read now. So, how many pages? I don't have to read that many because I'm kind of tired. I just didn't want to go off and do bookwork. My son went to Las Vegas for what is it called? Bachelor's party with 9 of his buddies. The one thing that my son noticed is that Las Vegas is like, if we think Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada is Sin City, Las Vegas is worse. It's out in the desert, whatever. And it's a free-for-all when it comes to prostitution and drugs, basically, because they want to keep the tourists, because I'm just cutting it to the chase, people, because they want to keep the tourists happy. So no fentanyl out in the streets there killing off people, because if tourists go down there and get knocked off when they're doing whatever they're doing, gambling or whatever, then people just won't go to Las Vegas. But if you come to British Columbia, Canada, they're being knocked off by flies, like flies, right? If they're not being knocked off the welfare rolls, they're being murdered for their organs. So isn't that interesting how that fentanyl ball rolls? And I said to my son, well, of course, because politics, right? They need the money going into that area. And then if the freaking, what you call it, the tourists are, snorting cocaine as they're gambling and flirting with hustlers, then, and then they die off from fentanyl, nobody's going to go. It will be in the big freaking, it will be in mainstream news media. That's when they'll report it. But they don't want to report on it. So it won't happen because the drugs are being diverted through that criminal activity, through that network, right? It only takes 3 to make criminal organization under the Criminal Code of Canada. I'm sure the same applies in the United States of America. Right? I just wanted to make a note of that. BC is flooded with fentanyl, but Las Vegas is not. All the cops turn a blind eye in Las Vegas to all the prostitution and freaking drugs out there, knowing that nobody's really going to die from it, right? Just so that they can have an economy. Well, out here, people are facing genocide so that the people moving in can reestablish the economy. And, sooner or later, I hate to say it, and this is where channels get censored in terms of, if you bring your reality to the table, in other words, after the white people die off out here, basically, you know, and the rest of the natives and whatnot, that lower class, as the immigrant population from Asia, South Asia, and those areas, who happen to be all brown people of some kind, take over, it's just a matter of time before they start preying upon themselves. So that's my only consolation in terms of what's happening to my family, because, you know, sooner or later the well is going to dry up, right? And they're going to have to go find a new well. But they already prey on their own in their own countries, and that's why they do it here when they come here, because it's already established in their own backward countries with their own backward thinking, as they rewrite history right along with everybody else. Anyway, the story of the earth. What this story tells us. We come to these pages to the actual shaping of the earth. We have seen how a fiery cloud became the great earth ball on which we live. Oh, do I really have to read this? But the earth is going slow. I'm tired. I really shouldn't be reading this right now. But anyway, but the earth is not even and smooth like a ball. Oh, yes. I don't know where this flat earth theory came from. It's spread through the YouTube streets. And I guess through this censorship, flat earth conspiracy theories are being wiped off the planet. If these people want to promote flat earth, they're either going to have to go get their own website and post it up on there, or go to a different website like BitChute or something, because I don't know, like I said, YouTube, making me think that maybe they just might end up becoming a GeoCities, and for the big video makers, right? I know what it feels like to do something and then have somebody come in and rewrite the JavaScript and the code and, change the format. And all of a sudden, you go from this nice so-called web page to, I don't know what they give you. And, you don't have a choice but to accept that type of service. And then eventually, they're just going to inform you one day that the whole company itself is going to shut down and all the videos are going to get deleted, like GeoCities. And they'll just have their own archive that they run through Google search. So in other words, if you go New Foundation for Community Partnerships, right? Once in a while, you'll come up with an old GeoCities webpage that I made through their server and their HTML editor. But because it's on their server, they archived it. So now my traffic that if you were to Google for my page goes still to the old GeoCities. How that benefits them, I don't know. All I know is I couldn't make web pages anymore, and I had to go and copy everything and recreate those web pages somewhere else. And even when you go into my website, you'll come across a few pages that are still stuck with the old GeoCity tags, HTML tags, links, and all that other crap, simply because I haven't had a time to go back in there and rewrite everything. So I'm thinking, okay, so what happens if YouTube decides just to go belly up? And I've got over 16,050 videos That's a lot of videos. 16,000 videos. I have 16,000 videos on my channel, people. More than 16,000. Right? And I don't monetize. See, I can't see the computer with these glasses. I already lost my other glasses. I'm hooped here, people. Do you see how my eyes are going on me? I have 16,010 videos. No, not 16,000. 1,610 videos. That's what I have. 1,610 videos. Now just imagine YouTube just turning off the button on me. Do you see how I struggle with this? It's like this when I do paperwork too. And it's hard on me. Okay, let's go back to a little bit more reading, and then I'm just going to call it a night, because I think this one page speaks for itself. I think we're pretty spot on. What happened to Pluto? Where did Pluto go? Right? I remember being taught about Pluto being a planet in freaking middle school. Right? And then I remember being 30 years old, and all of a sudden it was a big news, well, maybe not 30, but somewhere around that age, it was a big news flash that Pluto was no longer considered to be a planet, and that you were supposed to wipe it out of your freaking brain, even though they taught it to you in school. And now it's kind of the same thing, the same stuff that's going on right now. They're wiping things out after they have allowed you to establish routine and be able to budget around those routines, and, based on basic principles. And anyway, the shaping of the earth. Okay. There are great hollows in it filled by the seas, and great mountains rising into the clouds. Now you have to remember, this is an old book. That's what I like about old English language and stories and stuff. They tend to talk a little more different than we do, right? 1911. Copyright, earliest one, 1868. 1868 is the earliest. I guess this one was done by 1918. That's the last print I see on this. So 100 years anyway. What made these ocean beds? How were the mountains formed? It was thought at one time that the earth had been shaped by great storms and explosions and shocks of many kinds. But we know now that the mountains and the valleys and ocean beds, the precipices, the gorges and caves, have all been made by slow influences working from the beginning and working now. We read here how the shape of the earth is always changing, and how the sea and the land are always changing places. The shaping of the earth. After the making of the moon. Really, the cooling of the earth would still continue, as indeed it is continuing at this very moment. At last there would be formed what men call the crust of the earth, and since this would really be hard and dry, it might quite properly be called a crust. This goes right around the earth, and we must not imagine that it has breaks in it where the oceans are. Doubtless, it is thinner there just in proportion as the oceans are deep. But the crust of the earth still forms the bed of the ocean, and so all the lands are really one under the sea. Now the crust of the earth is not even and smooth. You might imagine that if the earth covered with melted rock, gradually and evenly cooled, the surface might be quite smooth and regular. But you must remember that whilst this cooling is going on, there are many other things at work. which are carving the face of the earth. In one age, the most important instrument of this carving might be the flowing of water, and in another, it might be the action of heat. But in any case, the face of the earth is not a constant thing, but has always been changing, and is even now changing from hour to hour. Even with the memory of living man, the sea has broken down and destroyed a great deal of the east coast of England, and there are places near the south coast of England now stranded high and dry, which were once flourishing ports beside the sea. I don't know what area they're talking about, but it should be interesting to see 100 years later if they're facing the same issues. Now, though the subject is rather difficult, we must inquire at least a little into the various kinds of forces that have been molding and changing the surface of the earth from age to age. And first of all, let us get into our heads. Get it into your head. Do your hair. And keep there a fact which men long denied. What's this fact? This fact is simply that the history of the crust of the earth, though it has been a history of constant change, has been, on the whole, a peaceful history. It used to be thought that the history of the earth had been made by a number of great disasters, each of them making a new state of things which stayed unchanged until a fresh disaster occurred. Now, very possibly, there have been some big disasters in the earth's history. It was some very great force, perhaps, that threw up the Himalaya mountains. Even nowadays, when the earth is getting cool, there remain some active volcanoes, and small earthquakes are quite common. But nevertheless, we may be sure that sudden and great disasters like these have not played a very great part in the earth history. Change has been slowly but always going on. The poet tells us that constant dropping wreath away a stone. Weareth, Weareth, weareth. Constant dropping weareth away a stone. I'd have to look up the word weareth. And that is the kind of force which has for so many ages been carving the face of the earth. Weareth, the dropping weareth away, constant dropping weareth. I'm just thinking weareth, like weary, you're just, you're weary, you're tired, you're slow, I don't know. Not a great I'm in denial. What you gonna do? Disaster one day. You can't be afraid to face the dark, people. It's almost equal to Amari not being able to move if you think about it. And then no change, disaster. Okay, let's go back to that. Not a great disaster one day. And then no change for 1,000 years. But constant dropping every day and all day. It's that you have that stone. I think I have one here. Yeah, I do. There it is. That's what they're talking about. You see that? That's where. I'm going to stick your finger in there. A pencil. That's where water. Goes in quite deep. that's where water dripped in some cave for a long, long time. That's what they're talking about. I know, I just happen to have a rock like that around. Yeah. The idea of the quiet but never ceasing way in which the history of the Earth's crust has been worked is one of the most important ideas that we must have on this subject. It is true, not only of the subject, but of nature's story generally. The old Romans knew this. See, you have to remember these books came from, I think, pretty much in the England area, right? European area, right? Because anytime I read them, I always mention the Romans, right? They can't really write about Punjabi people because they're not living in that culture. They can only write about what's in their culture or in their history. They can make reference to, India and places like that, but they can't really, they can't write it in their language with their stories, with, their people and experiences. And so, in light of that, the old Romans knew this when they said, nature does nothing by jumps. Her way is slow and sure, though she rarely does anything startling. Yet she never takes a rest, and that is the way to succeed. Well, then, amongst the forces which have molded the crust of the earth, we must count first of all the force of the gravitation itself. For remember that all the while this earth is shrinking, shrinking, shrinking. Never heard of that before. As the interior shrinks, you will understand that the outside will become too big for it and will not be sufficiently supported underneath. So a great many things would be apt to happen. Have you ever been taught that the earth has been shrinking? I don't know what class that was taught in, but I do not remember that. For instance, quite a large part of the earth's surface may begin to collapse, subside, or sink. Okay, this was written 100 years ago. And if you think about it, in the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, with access to the internet, Bayou Corn up in Louisiana over there near New Orleans, the salt domes, have been having issues. Now, mind you, they tried to blame Halliburton for, I think it was Halliburton or that was BP oil, right? But whoever owned the salt mine in Louisiana there, Bayou Corn, where the mine itself was starting to cave in because of something that they didn't do. But even still, the whole area, or that sinkhole that opened up. Now, I'm confused here. Yeah, the sinkhole was Bayou Corn, and they tried to blame it on a company, saying that they didn't, in case because what they do is they take out salt from the salt domes up in the, east coast of the United States of America. And then what they end up doing is after they take out the salt and they make these huge caverns, they fill them up with butane gas and, and whatever, right? They fill them up with things that need to be stored. Well, one of these caverns, they started to, cave in, and it became the sinkhole that, spread out into, blah. So, okay. And they're like sinkholes all over the place. Then, of course, if it goes on doing this long enough, the water will rush in upon it. There's your sinkhole with the water going in. And what was once dry land may become the bottom of the sea. Right? Then again, as the surface of the earth shrinks and finds itself not sufficiently supported from below, it may shrivel. This is to say, it may become folded. And Do you not? I have to read that. Hold on, I got to change my glasses. I can't read with these on the computer. Here, I just noticed it now. Let me see what you say. Do you have flexible thumb or hitchhiker's thumb? Is that a book? Flexible thumb or hitchhiker's thumb? I'm not sure. It must be a book. I'll Google it. I don't think so, though. This is an old children's series. Oops, sorry. This is an old children's series. I don't know if you're still there or not, but anyway, it's the Book of Knowledge. That's what we're reading here. From it dates back as early as 1886. This was published in 1918, so they're over 100 years old. It's just like a children's encyclopedia, right? I'd have to look in here. You never know. You see? But what I do is I just take it like, here's this. You can see. I just, at this point, have 3 books, and I kind of flip them around like cards, right? And then I just kind of randomly pick something to see what the spirits have to say in terms of history and how much has changed. Because you know how they say nothing is new under the sun. So sometimes you feel like you're the only one out there struggling with something, when in fact there's been people before you, because there is nothing new under the sun, ultimately. And I just want to, I make it a game because, I feel somewhat embarrassed, sitting here reading old books to live stream. Do you see how bad my eyes are? And now just imagine me doing this with nonprofit books or any kind of paperwork these days. So it's 5:24, right? This kind of embarrasses me, but there's other ways to have pity parties in terms of feeling sorry for yourself. I mean, not that I'm feeling sorry for myself, but I kind of am. This is easy compared to other things I have to do and think about. And assuming that YouTube doesn't shut the light off on my channel in terms of they just don't want to support the bandwidth anymore and decide to delete everything. The chances of me uploading everything onto another website is like, but while I'm here, why not? It's different. It's not hurting anybody. If anything, it's enlightening. And it brings us to the present. It really does, people, because it goes back to, where's Pluto? What happened to Pluto? I remember being taught that Pluto was a planet. As a matter of fact, my teacher told me to never forget that, and I didn't. So when they came back and they debunked it and said, no, Pluto is not a planet, get it out of your head. You taught wrong. I in my head, I refuted it. I'm like, to hell with you. You can say whatever you want. I'm going to believe what I want. And that's the basic principle that's going on with YouTube, with the various channels out there. So I would say, in terms of like a random kind of, spiritual, where we're at in terms of 100 years, nothing new under the sun. Pretty spot on. Okay, let's get back to this. I don't know how many more pages I'm going to read. It can get daunting. I should read a couple more anyway. Just finish. Okay. Her way is slow and sure. Though she rarely does anything startling, yet she never takes a rest. And that is the way to succeed. Well, then, amongst the forces which have molded the crust of the earth, we must count, first of all, the forces of the gravitation itself, For remember that all the while this earth is shrinking, shrinking, shrinking. Okay. For instance, a large part of the earth's surface may begin to collapse aside or sink. Been there. Then, of course, if it goes on doing this long enough, the water will rush in. We know about sinkholes, and what was once dry land may become the bottom of the sea. Then again, as the surface of the earth shrinks and finds itself not sufficiently supported from below, it may shrivel. That is to say, it may become folded. And do you not see that one of these folds might make a long range of mountains? Now, just as the surface of the earth will sink, oh, God forbid if you're one of my cuckoos. Are you the cuckoo? Watching me at 5:30 in the morning? Oh. But you see, you might be the cuckoo watching me right now. But there's other people every now and then. It's like just, you have no clue, man. You have no clue. I don't do it for the cuckoos. You're in it for the end, right? In terms of a nonprofit, I have nothing to apologize for. Now, just as the surface of the earth will sink in one place, so it may become pushed up in another. One of the ways in which this may happen is by the folding. Therefore, just as, okay, that's where the tectonic plates do all that crap, right? Therefore, just as what was once dry land may become the bottom of the sea, so also the very bottom of the sea may be gradually raised up until the water runs away from it and becomes dry land. All England has been at the bottom of the sea, and so was much of North America. It is hard, is it? It is hard, is it not, to think that more than half of Europe and America were once covered with ice, to believe that Broadway and Strand, Himalayan and Coloradoran summits even were once the floor of the ocean. In his great poem, Tennyson has expressed these facts and done so in such simple and clear language that we may quote his words. There rolls the deep where grew the trees. O earth, what changes hast thou seen? There, where the long street roars, hath been the stillness of the central sea. The hills are shadows, and they flow from form to form, and nothing stands. They melt like mist, the solid lands. Like clouds, they shape themselves and go. Another of the great forces that have made the surface of the earth what it is today has been heat. Do you want to know something, people? Do you know how detrimental school can be to a person's self-esteem? Honest to God. When I was little, right, my first language was German. I didn't know any English. I guess I had been in foster care. How else would I have learned to speak German? I was with German people. And then when I was 5, I went to my grandmother's house, and I stayed with my grandmother. And she looked after me for a while. She built me this little playhouse with my mother. And in that playhouse, I had paper. That's all they gave me was lots and lots of paper and pencils and rulers. And I was 5, 6 years old, right? And but in those days, all I could do was speak German. And my grandma would call me to come inside, and I'd be like in German and run off and climb trees and all this other stuff. So that's how I know, because she used to tell me that she'd get mad, right? Because I wouldn't come in, and I'd go running off speaking German, and she'd find me climbing up in the little tree in the yard there, right? And then I remember going to school, like in grade 1, right? having to walk up this hill, wasn't allowed to talk to nobody. Had to walk back pretty much by myself, just a little girl. And it was quite a distance, really. It was like, oh, I don't know. If I had to put numbers of blocks on it, long blocks, like 5, 6, 7 long blocks. So a fair distance. And, and sitting in the classroom, long story short, I struggled with English for a very long time, really. Spelling, certain words, there was always those little glitches in there. Not so much now because I worked on the nonprofit for so many years and I've done so much typing that whatever little glitches I had in there have mostly corrected themselves, like how and who. In the old days, I used to get how and who mixed up in terms of spelling. Who is WHO, how is HOW. But with the glitches of, speaking a different language, then learning English as you were being reprimanded because you weren't learning it fast enough or you weren't doing it correctly. What actually developed my language skills wasn't anything that I so-called learned in school. If anything, school was self-defeating in the fact that, for example, by the time I hit 17 or something like that, I had gone through some trials and tribulations and then ended up into an alternative program in this old school that was just kind of converted into an alternative program for high-risk youth, basically, right? The teacher wanted me to write something, so I wrote a fair amount, gave it to the teacher, and the teacher just even in that grade level reprimanded me and said, oh, blah, it didn't make any sense, you don't know what you're talking about, you need to correct it, you need blah, 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 blah. So just really just kind of put that on your head that you can't do it right, because there's an ulterior motive behind it. Because an educated, and I've said this before, an educated population in terms of with proper critical thinking skills, and obviously the more you can read and write, the more powerful you become, just because you can fight back in different ways in terms of like courts and all that other crap. It's harder to manipulate you, right? So I didn't really start getting good at the English language until I sat down and I decided that I was going to found a foundation. And that's really when I picked up my dictionary and did a Malcolm X. Right? In terms of when it came time to write the bylaws for the foundation, I contacted 3 different organizations, had them send me their bylaws, and then studied their bylaws, 3 different nonprofit organizations. World Vision was one of them. And then studied all 3, and then sat down with my dictionary after I studied what I was reading and decided to make an attempt to write my own bylaws, and I did. And it's just whatever. Reading out loud, if you're not a very good reader because you were embarrassed in school, because you were made to stand up and read and you stuttered over your words and then you were humiliated because you couldn't read very well, you can't let that be a mental block from stopping you from reading. You have to keep trying. That's what I'm trying to say. Unless, of course, you're pro at it. Then you don't have to worry about it. Okay. Another of the great forces that have... So I really contribute my reading attributes just with the fact of what I've been doing with the foundation since ever. And then, of course, anything that's I've written around the foundation over the years. And then it just extended over to other things. Another of the great forces that have made the surface... How long has this been going on for? Oh my God. I'm going to be so tired today. My son came home and woke me up. Technically, I should be in War Room 1 doing paperwork. But I thought, I haven't done one of these in a long time, and I kind of want to leave something of substance behind after I'm gone. And that's only assuming that YouTube doesn't pull the switch up out from underneath my videos. These ones I can't store on my external hard drive. I don't know how to download them onto my computer so that I can make a copy and put it onto my external hard drive. I haven't been able to figure that out. I tried different methods that I came across on, the Google search, but nothing seems to work. Another of the great forces that have made the surface of the earth what it is today has been heat or fire. We are quite sure even now that the inside of the earth is very hot. If we dig into the ground, we find that it becomes hotter and hotter as we go down. And every time that a volcano spouts out liquid lava, it reminds us of the terrible heat that is beneath us. We live then on a crust that spans a glowing lake of fire on a crust that is very thin. If we paste a sheet of paper over the surface of a good-sized melon, we should have the relative proportions. Men who study rocks are able, without much difficulty, to tell which kinds of rocks have been formed under the influence of heat or fire. The Latin word for fire is ignis, and so these rocks, which are amongst the deepest layers. These cliffs in the Isles of Staffa off the coast of Scotland are made of wonderful pillars of black rock called basalt, formed ages ago by the actions of fire. There are many thousands of them. And then the bottom one here, in some parts of the world are caves with wonderful things like icicles hanging from the roof and other things made of the same stuff rising from the floor. Those shown here are the cave in England. They have been made by water trickling through the rocks. Right? You can see the hole. Drip, drip, drip. As it trickled through, the water dissolved the rock, and on each of the air again, the rock and the water became separated and formed the curious thing we see. And then the Latin word for fire is ignis, and so these rocks, which are amongst the deepest layers of the earth's crust that we know, are called igneous rocks. This word quite well contrasts them with those parts of the earth's crust which have been formed under the influence of water. The Latin word for water is aqua, and so we call these parts of the earth's crust aquosus. The action of water, then, is one of the great forces that have made and are still making the surface of the earth. Okay. So we're dealing with all the elements, really. That's what? Fire, water, air, and I don't know. What are they? Type them out for me. What are the four elements? Fire, water, Let me just Google it. That's what happens when you get tired. Can't remember things. Okay. Earth. I wanted to say earth, air, fire, and water. So we're dealing with the 4 elements. In relation to change over a slow period of time. The action of water, then, is one of the great forces that have made and are still making the surface of the earth. In our own days, it is by far the most important. In the first place, remember what happens to a lump of sugar if you put it into a glass of water. The sugar is melted or dissolved, and this happens all the more quickly if you stir the water. Now, water is always moving, and what with its powers of dissolving things, and what with the help this power gets from the movement of the water, you may guess that every river, for instance, helps to change the surface of the earth. Then also, of course, water can carry solid things along with it as it moves, even without dissolving them. And then perhaps when the water comes to some place where it moves more slowly, this solid stuff that has been whirling along may drop and become heaped up at the bottom. Moving water is always remaking the surface of the earth. That is another way in which water has changed and is changing and the surface of the earth, changing the surface of the earth. Indeed, we can do better now than to describe the way in which water moves about on the earth. It has been doing this ever since the time when the earth first became cool enough to have liquid water upon it at all. And in the course of this ceaseless round that water runs, it has been endlessly making and remaking the face of the earth. Let us begin with the water of the sea. This, as you know, is very salt water. Did you know? I'm going to check this fact. But did you know that your blood and your system has pretty much the same? I'm pretty sure I read this correctly, people. It has the same salticity in terms of what's in the ocean water. Same percentage. Your blood should be just as salty as what's the ocean water in terms of the equilibrium. This, as you know, is very salt water, which simply means that it has a lot of salt-tasting solid stuff melted into it. Perhaps you will want to know where that comes from. Now let me see in a minute whether I can tell you. The sun has the power of sucking up into the air a great deal of water from the sea. What it sucks up, however, is only the water and not the salt stuff, which has been melted in it. If you pour a little water into a saucer and leave it exposed, you will find that after a time, it has all gone. And if you put it in a full sunlight, it will go very much more quickly. Now, if it is seawater that you have put into the saucer, you will find that the salt left behind and makes you will find that the salt is left behind and makes a little crust which the sun cannot draw into the air. How the clouds are drawn up out of the sea. Well, the water is drawn up into the air by the sun in this fashion, and there, if there is a great deal of it, perhaps it will form clouds. Okay, so it's just talking about condensation. Can see. The reason why the sea is never quite full. Long ago, this was noticed by the writer of the book. I don't know how to say this word. Ecclesiastes. My son could probably pronounce it, but I can't. Anyway, he said, all the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. Unto the place from whence the rivers come, thither they return again. He was quite right. The reason why the sea is never filled, though all the rivers run into it, is that the sun is constantly drawing water out of the sea. So there is the continental circulation, or going around and round of the water of the earth. We said that we should soon find out where the salt of the sea comes from. The answer is that it comes from the rivers. As the water flows over the land to the sea, it carries down with it great deals of solid matter, which is apt to drop at one place or another where the current becomes slower. Much more important, however, is the fact that as it goes, it also dissolves or melts all the kinds of solid matters that can be dissolved or melted that it finds on its way. If this goes on for some time, the river will be able to eat a great gorge in the land, and those gorges may be seen in all parts of the world. But now you will see that though there is a going round and round of the water, there is no going round and round or circulation of the salts that the water dissolves, nor of the solid matter which it carries down with it. These are not sucked up again by the sun. The consequence is that from age to age, all the rivers on the earth are washing part of the land into the sea, and indeed the sea is yearly becoming more and more salt. When the seas were first made by the falling of the water from the sky into the deeper parts of the earth, they must have been quite fresh, and ever since then they have been becoming more and more salt. Men who study these subjects have used the saltness of the sea as a means of helping them to find out how old the earth is. They can measure the amount of salt which rivers carry down to the sea, and they can make a pretty good guess of the amount of salt that is in the sea. And so from these pieces of information, they can find out for how many years probably the rivers have been flowing. It is interesting that the guesses as to the age of the earth's crust which have been made by this means do not differ very greatly from the guesses which have been made in quite other ways. Water is also to be reckoned with as the maker of a very large number of the rocks and other kinds of stuff which we find on the crust of the earth. Many of these have been made merely by the movement of the water. You readily understand, for instance, that the sea and the tides make sand. And of course, if this sand be pressed together, and of course, if this sand be pressed together and held together, we shall have sandstone. You know what shingles is too, and the rivers of the earth are washing part of the land into the sea, and indeed the sea is yearly becoming, okay, read that. I went the wrong way. You know what shingles is too, and shingle, like sand, has been made and is constantly being made by the action of water. Ordinary clay and gravel too have been made in this way. Then there are the great many kinds of rock, such as the chalk cliffs of Dover, England, that are really made from the remains of living creatures that existed long ago. Chalk cliffs consist of the chalky I'm just going to finish this part and then call it a night. Just this little piece right here. Part of the bodies of millions of these tiny, because I mean, how many more pages do we got? See, I like to finish kind of like the section. That's just the section. Right? I don't like to leave it hanging. Part of the bodies of millions of these tiny creatures all pressed together. Water has played a great part in making rocks of this kind. Besides these and a host of others, there are the kinds of rocks which water has made in other ways, neither by the action of its movement nor by acting upon the remains of living creatures. In many parts of the world, there are caves which have wonderful things, rather like icicles hanging from the roof, and also other things made from the same kind of stuff, rising up from the same kind of stuff, right? Rising up from the floor to meet them. These have very long names which do not matter to us just now. They also, like many others, have been made by water in a rather different way. The water has first of all melted or dissolved the stuff of which these things are made, and then when the water has been gradually exposed drop by drop to the air, a change has taken place in the stuff inside. So, you know, when you take it into the context of what's happening with society, you know, everybody's citing this 1984 Orswell, you know, everybody's losing their basic human rights, and, you know, with this smart meter and in your fridges and, you know, and freaking in the walls and the paint, you know, it's just like people know that something's wrong. People know that we're being lied to. People know that we're being experimented on. People know that we're being spied upon. People know these things, you know. It's not mass hysteria. It's not mass paranoia. You know, it's that truth that is being censored on social media by political groups that want to keep one area of the planet free of fentanyl so it can be Sin City for the purpose of, you know, prostitution and rampant drug use, just as long as those casino dollars are coming in from across the world in terms of if you were to go visit Las Vegas. But then on the other hand, come into British Columbia, Canada, and it's a hit and miss because you're either going to be the one doing the massacre or you're going to be the one being massacred, where, you know, fentanyl is being used against your family as a method to bring genocide to the Canadian-born people so that other people can move into the country and take over. And that is a slow process. It doesn't mean that I'm right or wrong. It just means that one man's truth isn't necessarily another man's truth. But at the same time, nothing is new under the sun, right? And it's a progression. Here, they're just talking about it like with rocks. But what's going out in society in terms of you're being taught one thing, and then years later, you're being told to forget it, that it no longer exists because somebody else has a different agenda and wants to rewrite history to suit that agenda because they can simply burn the book. Isn't that what they're doing when they're taking down people's videos, shutting down people's channels? Are they not burning books? Is that just not a different form of book burning? Seems to me like it is. And if they do it enough times, right, then it becomes social programming, just like these caverns are being socially built. If you want to take it into a spiritual kind of context, right? Anyway. In many parts of the world, there are caves which have wonderful things, rather like icicles hanging from the roof, and also other things made of the same kind of stuff. Didn't we read that already? Okay. The making of the wonderful stone icicles of the caves, how the earth spinning makers bugle in the middle makes its bugle. Bugle? How the Earth spinning makes its bugle in the middle. We know why the Earth bulge makes its bulge in the middle. We know why the Earth bulges at the equator. It is because of the spinning. And as it spins, the stuff of which it is made tends rather to fly outwards, just like the drops on a spinning umbrella. This is why the Earth bulges at the equator. I didn't know the Earth bulged at the equator. But really, it bulges only very little. For if you went through the Earth from side to side, starting at one point of the equator and coming out at the other opposite point, coming out at the point opposite it, you would have to go only about 27 miles further than if you went through the Earth from the North Pole to the South Pole. Anyway, okay, so we kind of got what we wanted here in terms of, like, nothing new under the sun. Why was it that I was taught about Pluto being a planet and was asked to remember it, and then years later told to forget about it? And it seems like history is repeating itself in terms of, I don't know, freedom of speech. I don't even want to call it social media, right? I don't consider YouTube to be social media. Facebook, maybe, I suppose, to some degree, but it depends on how active you are in terms of being socially or being a social butterfly, right? I guess we're going to have a lot of Plutos pretty soon, right? It should be interesting to see where that drip is taking us, people, in terms of people losing their channels, and people losing their routines, and people losing their budgets, and people losing their what is it called? I don't want to say self-esteem, but it's like, a lot of people, they're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to create gainful employment for themselves, and like if YouTube and companies like YouTube, I'm just chatting here for a minute, like if they want to censor people and I personally think it's, getting rid of the bandwidth without making people pay for it, right? The bigger channels, I mean, obviously they're using up a lot of bandwidth, because when you go, whoever is holding the video on the server is the one that's paying the fee, right? And with cutbacks on everything that's going on the planet right now from every sector, I don't see internet websites to be much different. So this could be one reason why we're in that 1984 whatever, people being censored out, deemed guilty before they even go in front of a jury of their peers, blah blah. Yeah, like it's just no. Anyway, I'm gonna turn this off now. I can't see with these glasses. Everything blurry. I can't read nothing. If I try and I can't. Now, if I was to, there, I can see it now with one eye. This one. It gives me a headache. If I lose these, I go into straight up panic mode.